The morning the FBI showed up at my farm, even the horses froze. I was fixing a fence near the south pasture when I heard engines coming up the gravel road, slow, deliberate. Not one vehicle, not two, three black SUVs rolling toward my front gate, like they already knew exactly where they were going. Dust lifted behind them, the dogs started barking, and by the time I pulled off my gloves, two federal agents were stepping out with badges hanging where everybody could see them. And right behind them, arms folded, wearing that smug little smile she always saved for other people's problems, was Karen Jenkins from the HOA. That was when I knew this wasn't another petty complaint about my barn or the way my land looked from the subdivision road. Karen had taken it all the way to the federal level, borrowed bigger words, bigger authority, and convinced herself she was finally about to make me fold on my own property. My name's Daniel Mercer, and if you had seen me standing there in mud-caked boots with a fence tool in one hand and the FBI at my gate, you probably would have thought I was just another farmer about to get buried under paperwork. That's exactly what Karen thought too. What she never understood was that my family had records on that land going back longer than her whole subdivision had existed. My father bought the first parcel in 1987, back when most of this county was still dirt roads, cattle fencing, and handshake deals. Over the years, my family added connected tracks, restored drainage lines, kept up access roads, and held on to old filings most people forgot existed. Karen first appeared about a year earlier, standing at my north fence in a white blazer and sunglasses, holding a clipboard like it gave her jurisdiction. She introduced herself as president of the HOA across the ridge and started listing my supposed offenses: ugly shed, uneven fencing, cattle too close to residential value. I told her the truth. My property was not part of her HOA, had never been part of her HOA, and was not subject to one single rule printed on her letterhead. That should have ended it. Instead, it encouraged her. Within weeks, I got notice after notice in the mail: roadway, used drainage property, appearance, community safety interest, all wrapped in bold print and fake urgency. Then she started orbiting my property, taking pictures from the road, measuring strips near my gate, talking to contractors, building a story she hoped would sound official if she repeated it long enough. If she had stopped there, I would have handled it the normal way: lawyer, boundary packet, warning to stay off my land. But Karen didn't want a correction. She wanted control. So when bluffing didn't work, she reached for the biggest hammer she could find. That hammer came rolling up my driveway in three black SUVs. The senior agent introduced himself, calm as stone, and said they were there to review a complaint involving misuse of restricted agricultural land, unregistered storage activity, blocked access routes, and possible concealment of federally reportable materials. Karen, meanwhile, lifted her chin like she was waiting for me to crack. I didn't panic. Guilty men panic. I just asked him one question. Which part of my property did she tell you to inspect first? Karen jumped in before he could answer. Of course she did. She pointed toward the old storage building near the tree line and started talking too fast, stacking accusation on top of accusation: suspicious trucks, undocumented tanks, blocked routes, public safety risk. She had spent a week digging through records she didn't understand and stitching together enough official language to make herself feel dangerous. So I unlocked the gate and invited them in. That threw her off immediately. Karen was expecting resistance. Instead, she got a guided tour. I walked the agents through the barns, the tanks, the machine shed, the logs, the records, every dull legal inch of the place. The air smelled like diesel, wet soil, and cut hay. It was just a farm, and the more they saw it, the less dramatic it looked. Then near the fence line, the senior agent stopped and asked the question that changed the whole morning. Mr. Mercer, who controlled the original parcels around this corridor before the subdivision plat was recorded. That was the moment Karen's face changed. My family did, I said. Then I explained what Karen had failed to understand before making that call. My farm wasn't some isolated patch beside her neighborhood. It was part of an older chain of parcels tied to access roads, drainage routes, utility easements, and boundary filings that existed long before her HOA ever drew breath. The subdivision was new. Our paper trail wasn't. One of the agents asked if I had documentation. I took them into the farmhouse office and pulled out the folder I kept for exactly this kind of person. Inside were certified surveys, parcel maps, access agreements, tax summaries, and dated references connecting my father's first purchase in 1987 to the surrounding tracts we added over the years. The senior agent studied the papers, then asked whether the subdivision's assumptions about access and drainage had ever conflicted with the older filings. The answer was yes, enough overlap over the years to make one thing crystal clear. Karen had no business pretending my property fit inside the world she imagined she controlled. Then came the twist she never saw coming. The road her HOA kept calling shared community access wasn't theirs. Never had been. The drainage strip she mentioned in her complaint wasn't theirs either. And the back corridor she tried to describe like some suspicious zone sat inside a chain of legacy filings tied to my family's land, not her board's authority. That changed the room. The agent stopped looking at my barns and started looking at Karen. She tried to recover, said she was only reporting what she believed to be irregular use, said residents were concerned, said she had been given to understand that parts of my land fell under subdivision oversight. That phrase is poison when records exist. One agent asked where exactly she got that information. A planning comment, a development packet, something from a board meeting. A resident who knew somebody at the county office. The more she talked, the weaker it sounded. None of it was clean, none of it was official. Then the senior agent asked whether she had ever entered my property measured near my gate or directed anyone to inspect land outside her authority. Karen hesitated. Just for a second, but that second was enough. Because now we weren't talking about my farm anymore. We were talking about her behavior. I told the agents I had camera footage from the North Boundary Road, time-stamped photos of Karen and two board members near my markers and written statements from workers who had seen her directing people along my outer access line while building her complaint. I also had copies of her notices, including the ones where she repeatedly described my land as if it fell inside HOA enforcement. The silence after that hit harder than shouting ever could. I had the packet on the table in less than 2 minutes. Still frames, dates, notice, copies, photos, every smug little paragraph she had sent trying to drag my farm into a system that had never touched it. And right there in black ink was the line that buried her own language describing my property as subject to community enforcement provisions that had never applied. Then the senior agent asked her one direct question. Did you personally verify any of these jurisdiction claims before making a federal report? Karen tried to answer sideways. She acted out of concern. Residents were worried. There could have been serious violations. Then she made the mistake that finished her. She blamed the county, said somebody there had basically confirmed she was right. The agent asked for a name. She didn't have one. Asked for an email. She didn't have one. Asked for a written determination map annotation or formal notice tying my farm to HOA authority. She had nothing. That was when I added the last piece. I told the agents Karen had been warned more than once that my land was outside HOA control, that she had kept issuing notices anyway, and that after failing locally, she had escalated to federal accusations built on words she clearly did not understand. She hadn't uncovered some threat on my farm. She had weaponized authority because she couldn't control property that was never hers to begin with. The senior agent closed the folder, looked at Karen, and said they would be documenting the discrepancy between the complaint and the verified land records. Then he added quietly that knowingly false or materially misleading statements made to trigger official action could carry consequences beyond a neighborhood dispute. Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She left my gate without another word. And after that, her whole little campaign came apart fast. The board started scrambling people who had backed her, suddenly remembered they had never been fully informed, and within a week the HOA stopped sending notices to my address. Within 2 neighbors who used to slow down and stare at my fence line had started waving again. Within a month, Karen wasn't acting like the Queen of Willow Creek anymore. I never got some big apology, and honestly, I didn't need one. Watching her federal stunt collapse under the weight of records my family had been keeping since before her neighborhood existed, that was satisfying enough. But what stayed with me wasn't just the victory, it was the reminder. My father used to say paper outlasts noise, and that morning proved it. Karen had titles, opinions, polished meetings, and a board full of people who confused proximity with power. I had deeds, plats, history, and the truth. And truth doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it sits in a dusty folder for years waiting for the exact right fool to force it into daylight. That's the bitter lesson in all this. Some people move next to something old, something rooted, something they didn't build, and decide that seeing it means they're entitled to control it. That kind of arrogance doesn't just live in HOAs. It shows up anywhere people mistake access for ownership or confidence for authority. The last thing I remember from that day is standing back by the gate after the SUVs were gone. The dust had settled. The dogs had quit barking. One of the horses lowered its head and went right back to grazing like none of it had mattered. Karen's taillights disappeared down the road, and for the first time in a long while, that ridge looked quiet again. Justice doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it comes in a manila folder, a survey stamp, and the exact second a bully realizes the ground under her feet was never hers. So let me ask you this. When somebody lies to weaponize official power against a person they can't control, is that just a mistake? Or is that something a whole lot worse? And if you've ever dealt with HOA abuse, land disputes, or somebody trying to bully you with rules they had no right to enforce, drop your story in the comments and tell me where you stand.